Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
Can we get serious now?
One thing that did happen during the 60s was some music of an unusual or experimental nature did get recorded or did get released. Now look at who the executives were in those companies at those times. Not hip young guys. These were cigar-chomping old guys who looked at the product that came and said, I don't know. Who knows what it is? Record it, stick it out. If it sells, all right. We were better off with those guys than we are now with the supposedly hip young executives who are making the decisions of what people should see and hear in the marketplace.
Success in the music business begins with a dream, a vision. This podcast will give you, the listener, the insight and tools to turn that vision into a reality. Meet the industry professionals who work day by day behind the scenes, helping to make those dreams come true. Welcome to the business side of music.
In the studio here in Nashville, Tennessee, this gentleman and I have known each other for a long time. We're not going to say how long. It's just been 3 longs. Don Muzquiz is joining us here. He is a tour manager, production manager, creator, producer, and host of another podcast called The Road Dog Project, which is unique in its own way because he actually does his interviews from the comfort or confines, depending on how you look at it, a tour bus, which is a very unique experience for a lot of people who have not been on one. And we're going to talk about that a little bit, but we're here to talk about you and the touring business and all that really cool stuff, and I'm sure we'll come up with some other topics. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, and I hope to return the favor and put you on the bus. And
take me out of town
and
drop me off somewhere.
No, I typically will pick up the guests near their home or wherever they want to be picked up and drop them back off in the same place. But I hope that I think your listeners probably know a little bit because you drop little hints here and there. But if they don't know, your history and your resume is pretty phenomenal. And I hope to really dig into that.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
And speaking of that, let's talk about yours a little bit. Tour manager and production manager for Alanis Morissette. Tour manager, production manager for Natalie Cole. Tour manager and production manager for Fantasia. Let me just name the names. Cassadee Pope, Jewel, Mary Wilson of the Supremes, Bice, Suzy Bogguss, Dee Messina, which is how you and I met many moons ago, and Eric Johnson. Plus, there's so many more. But how did you get started in this business?
Well, that could take your whole show, but
that's okay. We got plenty of tape.
Yeah, and lots of editing to do. I come from I'm the youngest of 6. All were musicians, born and raised in South Texas, south of San Antonio, a little place called Moore. We try to condense it a little bit. Everybody in my family played instruments. We were all in high school band, marching band, all that good stuff.
What did you play?
Drums, and still do occasionally.
Yeah.
3 drummers in my family, a saxophone player, a flute player, a clarinet player. My dad, I think, lived vicariously through us. He played banjo and a little bit of piano, and I was pretty much self-taught. My mother didn't play anything. I always said she played a mean radio. But they really, like many people, music really kept us out of doing crazy other things, and it took a lot of our childhood. And I grew up in a house full of instruments.
Wow.
Pursued music and performance and playing and did the rock band stuff. And then I went to Dallas, went to a commercial music program, Cedar Valley College, and was studying recording and music performance. While I was there, I got involved interning for a production company, Sound Southwest, which is no longer. But in Dallas, at that time in the 80s, things were really booming and growing, and that company was growing. And pretty quickly, I was left to do things that I wasn't prepared for. Left in nightclubs, mixing bands, mixing sound, setting up sound systems and things before, I really knew what I was doing. But
we call that baptism by fire.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely, and really learned a lot that way. Experience is the best teacher. So doing all that stuff and then growing with that company and doing everything from little bitty acoustic shows to giant concerts and everything else. So music, always wanted to do something in music. And while I was at the sound company, I also grew in my project skills, administrative skills. And so I learned a lot in that aspect as well as we went along. And so sort of production manager duties. And we started doing tours and things like that, which we did all of the stuff that came through Dallas. Tours that coming through that didn't have engineers or didn't have productions, things like that. So clubs and big stages and everything else. Through that, we got contract with Eric Johnson, big guitar player out of Austin, Texas. And so that was probably the first real tour that I got on.
And you were doing monitors.
I was doing monitors,
yeah.
Yeah, and also I wanted to clarify on some of those things. Those acts, some of those acts I tour managed for, but production managed as well, or at different times. Right now, for Alanis, I'm production manager, which is no small feat. Anyhow, going through the growth, so while I was in Dallas, I was doing some playing, but doing the audio thing, doing the production thing was really paying the bills. So I got more involved in that. And then as the 90s came in, country started growing. I started getting calls from Nashville. I was never in the country. I got a couple of calls for some things, and I thought, well, I'll go do a country thing, last a few weeks, whatever. So one of the first things that I did was with an artist, Suzy Bogguss.
Oh, yeah. And
she was opening up for Dwight Yoakam. And that was a pretty big tour, and I came in as the monitor engineer. They had, it was a revolving door. It was a tough spot. She was not tough, but it was a tough spot for her because opening up for Dwight Yoakam is a tough spot because you get very little sound check. And so all of the engineers that were going through that cycle were having a tough time, and so they were spitting guys out. I came in and I had no experience with in-ear monitors. I still don't remember exactly how I ended up there, but in-ear monitors was just developing and just coming about, and she was one of the Future Sonic's first clients and that sort of thing. So another baptism by fire. I thought I was going home pretty quickly because it was not going well, but I endured somehow. And so I was going back and forth. I was living in Dallas, going back and forth, and Suzy was fantastic. Toured with her for several years. We're still friends to this day. Learned a lot there, became production manager, from monitor engineer to production manager, monitor engineer.
Was she starting to headline at that point?
She was doing a little bit of both. Yeah. She was doing, that Dwight Yoakam tour was about 1.5 years long, something like that. So I really learned a lot. And then that was over, and then I got asked back again, and I was going back and forth between Dallas and Nashville. And when I figured out all the acts that are based here, so many acts are based here, and the way things operate going in and out of town on the weekends, I just ended up moving here. And because when she wasn't working, there was somebody else working. There was a bus leaving every weekend no matter what. So
and it's still that way.
It's still that way.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so now I live here in Nashville with the option. I don't have to live here for a lot of the acts that I work for that are not Nashville acts. I have East Coast acts and West Coast acts that I work for. But living here gives me the option because a lot of Nashville acts won't hire you if you don't live here.
Right. So
I get the option of both. And as a result, the last few years, I haven't done a lot of Nashville acts, but comes and goes. And I fill in for people. I do weekends or whatever. But I've done a lot of, and done a lot of mixing, a lot of these acts as well. But the administrative, the tour managing, production managing thing takes over. I love doing both. When I have done less of the mixing and just the production manager or just the tour managing, I can see how much each thing suffered when I was wearing multiple hats.
Really?
Yeah. And I think I want to say that I was good at doing all those things and I can do it again, but I really like having just, a focus because each one of these things, the bigger the act, the tougher the one job is.
The other thing too is, when I first started, I started out doing monitors. I was a monitor engineer. And then I became a stage manager. And as you took on each new thing, and then I became a guitar tech.
Yeah.
And it was like, I don't know what this is, but I'll figure it out because there were no schools. So when I first started road managing, there was no educational system. And when I say baptism by fire, that's how you learned.
Yeah.
So when you were asked to be a production manager or a tour manager, was it kind of like, well, yeah, I can figure this out, I think, and make it work?
Yeah, it was really a lot of that. There was I don't think at that time there was really much reference materials. And even the school that I went to had, music business courses and that sort of thing, but it doesn't talk to you. They don't teach you about getting people organized on the road and production aspects and stuff.
It's like what we call it herding kittens.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's really what it is when you're a road manager or tour manager.
Oh, yeah.
You're trying to keep everybody together and not lose bodies.
Exactly right. It's just a lot of details and being able to keep up with it and keeping things organized for everybody and getting, I always say, whether it's production manager, tour managing, we are the answer people. We're supposed to have answers. We're supposed to convey information and give it to everybody, make sure everybody has the information, that sort of thing. That's the key part. And when, we've been around longer than Googling has. When Google came along, I thought, well, we're all going to be out of jobs because all you got to do is pick up the phone and find anything you want. Or you could get any answers you want. But it's not so. Mm-mm. And it's amazing the kind of questions you still get asked when we've got this thing that'll tell you anything you want to know. But that's why we have jobs. We just have people's brains work differently. The creatives versus the
business end of it, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think I have a little bit of both of it. When I'm doing sound, it's very creative. It's a very artistic part that I like getting into.
And I don't think a lot of people look at mixing sound as that is a creative process.
It's like an instrument, and you're delivering it to the audience or delivering it to the band if you're doing monitors, that sort of thing. So it's very satisfying in the creative side that I have to have, when I get to do that stuff. But when you're doing that and you're wearing another hat, you're getting pulled all the time. And so you're trying to do sound check and you're answering phone calls and you're dealing with meet and greets and you're dealing with interviews for the artists and those sort of things. So it's all doable. And there's a lot of guys that still do that. And I did that for a long, long time. But like I say, when I saw how each thing suffered when I stepped back and only did one or two things, I wish I could go back and do it better,
What you're talking about here is really old school.
Yeah.
It's how we all did it back in the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s. Really before the advent of laptop computers and cell phones. I've said this on the show so many times. I used to carry a roll of quarters, $10 roll of quarters, and a notepad. Yeah. And you'd find a payphone, or you'd wait till you got to your hotel and, got all your slips, all your messages. Or if you were lucky, you got to the venue and they had a phone. That was, you were uptown if that happened. But it was really kind of an old school kind of way of doing business. And we don't do it that way anymore.
No.
Now there's software, there's programs, there's apps on your phone.
Oh, it's unbelievable. I remember getting a pager and thinking, how did we ever do it without pagers? I was excited to pull off the road to find a payphone, which you won't find anymore.
Right.
I was excited to go deal with, who was trying to get a hold of me. And then the pagers advanced to where they were, the text would come through.
Sky paging.
Yeah. That was unbelievable.
That was right before the what were those phones called? I can't even think of them. But yeah, it was like you jumped from Blackberries. You jumped from Sky paging to Blackberries, and it was a very short time window. But yeah,
very different now, and now. Everything, just like everything else, has to be fast. It has to be fast. There's no patience with anything. You got to have answers quick. But I've enjoyed it. And there's a little bit of OCD, a little bit of addiction. There's a little bit of organization stuff that I can't get past that I gathered from my parents.
I think you use the key word there, and that is, or the key phrase, I should say. The key phrase is if you want to be a tour manager or you want to be a production manager, you better have a little bit of OCD built into you.
Oh, yeah. You got to.
Because otherwise, you're going to go crazy anyway. Yeah. You might as well go crazy for a reason.
Exactly right. And you were talking about herding cats. So you've seen the meme that says, tour managing is like riding a bike, but the bike is on fire and your hair is on fire and everything's on fire.
Yeah. And you're jumping through a hoop that's on fire. Yeah.
Yeah. It can be that way. And you try to get ahead of it before a lot of our work is done before we leave. And then we have to go out and execute it,
Yeah.
That's in an ideal world. So,
in the studio with us here today in Nashville, Tennessee, Don Muzquiz.
Happy holidays. This is AJ Smith, and you're listening to The Business Side of Music.
You're listening to The Business Side of Music.
As a musician, you have a dream, that vision of what success looks like for you. Though it's not only about the money, money is part of it. Whether you've been extremely successful or you're just striving to maintain a regular cash flow, you need a plan. Money Concepts can help you develop a customized plan to achieve the financial stability and success you want. For over 40 years, Money Concepts has been providing holistic financial planning services to individuals, families, and business owners. As an independent firm, Money Concepts and their associates are committed to always represent the best interest of the client. It's really about a committed, benevolent interest in them personally. This independence, coupled with that committed, benevolent interest, means they represent you, the client, not a product supplier. It's not about selling products, it's about helping you achieve success. To learn how this can benefit you, contact my buddy, John Adams, with Money Concepts at 737-867-9309. That's 737-867-9309. You can also email John at jadams@moneyconcepts.com.
Hey friends, this is Dr. Garrett Hope. I am a speaker, coach, and composer. I am also host of the Portfolio Composer podcast and founder and executive director of the Ultimate Music Business Summit. The third annual Ultimate Music Business Summit is a 3-day virtual conference that will be held on January 5th, 6th, and 7th, 2023. This 3-day virtual event features over 24 speakers to help you build your music business. As a musician, you care about your art. You want to make a difference in your community and in the world. You want to pass your knowledge on to your students. And you want to do more than trade your time for money and just get by every month. UMBS is all about the one thing you didn't learn in music school, realizing that you are a business. It offers dozens of ways to build a career as an independent musician, including marketing, copywriting, studio development, mindset, money, and networking opportunities. Whether you're a composer, touring musician, studio teacher, recording artist, or professor, UMBS is for you. Get your ticket now at musicsummit.biz.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Back in the studio here in Nashville, Tennessee, Don Muzquiz is sitting across the podcast table. You mentioned something about, just because you're in Nashville doesn't mean it has to be a Nashville act. And one of the acts that I saw on your resume was Mary Wilson from the Supremes. Now, I had a buddy who was her production manager for several years, a guy by the name of Bobby Horace. And he worked with Mary and said she was just one of the greatest people ever to be on the road with. Did you find the same thing?
It's a pretty incredible time with her, especially the history, her history with the Supremes and stuff like that. And she had built up this museum, sort of traveling museum, mostly of gowns that the girls wore in the Supremes and stuff. And she took that around the world. We went to Russia and the Ukraine, which is something we probably won't get to do for a long time.
Right. If either one is standing at the end of the day. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Brought that museum with her. And when we were doing shows, she would spend a couple of days going and sort of hosting these museum sites, mobile museum. But we went around the world and the history. What I find, and with Natalie Cole as well, what I find is in all these other countries, they just love the American the music history in the U.S. And she's playing all the Supreme tunes and stuff and singing the lead and has her own backup singers and things like that. But she was fantastic. She was a great experience.
You bring up Natalie Cole. Now, about mid-'90s, I was working for an entertainment production company out of the Bay Area. And we had a client who wanted Natalie Cole to perform at a corporate date.
Yeah.
And the price wasn't an issue. What kind of stymied us a little bit was her nearly 100-page hospitality and technical writer. Did you ever see that? I still have a copy of it floating around.
Oh, yeah.
It's a book.
Oh. Well, part of tour managing, production managing, sort of on both topics here, is typically when I come in with a new act, I get the writer and try to see what I'm dealing with, because we are calling ahead, we're advancing all that stuff to make sure that we get what we need, not only technically, but hospitality-wise, backstage, all those sort of things. Because of my method, OCD or not, I've got to clean things up. And also don't like a lot of waste. And a lot of artists have writers that are just crazy extensive.
And haven't been changed, looked at, revised in years.
Exactly right. Exactly.
I know my wife and I did a show with Pam Tillis some years ago. And I'm one of those guys that if we're going to produce a date for a client, we wouldn't question the writer at all. We would just, whatever needs to be done, that's what would be in the dressing room. And I remember Pam Tillis and her husband is a road manager, and they walked in the dressing room and they went, "What is all this stuff?" And we said, "It's what's on your writer." And she looked at her husband and, "We got to change this."
Yeah. Happens all the time. When I came in with Natalie, I remember it being very lengthy. And not just on the hospitality side, but on the requirements, on the technical requirements, backline and things like that. Because there's a lot of fly dates where we're not traveling with much, and we're having everything, drums, guitars, amps, and everything provided. And so there's, again, a lot of times, if they don't have the updated thing, they'd be providing things that we just didn't need. And so it's always a constant battle to keep that updated so that you're getting what you're supposed to have and not getting a lot of excess equipment-wise and hospitality-wise, because nobody wants to leave there and just see stuff that doesn't get touched. A lot of food sitting around and just goes to waste most of the time.
Or backline sitting in cases that you didn't need.
Exactly right. Or the wrong ones, because these musicians have come and gone too, and they had specific requirements. They had specific amps or drums they had to have. There's a lot of have-to-have stuff. That's what you're dealing with.
Right.
But yes, I have trimmed many a writer, including Natalie's, and over, constantly updating it. I would almost monthly update the writer to trim it. When I figured out she's never going to touch those pistachios or whatever it is, we can take that off.
That are individually wrapped.
Yeah, exactly.
When we talk about writers, one of the things that, is infamous is the Van Halen brown M&Ms, which was put in just to see if the promoters were reading the writers. Yeah. What was the craziest thing you personally ever came across with any act that you worked with that you went, really? And I'll preface that by saying I toured with an act, and we kind of did that same Van Halen thing. Ours was a little more extreme in that we put in the writer that if not everything is met to our satisfaction, you as a promoter will have to purchase 4 tickets to Disneyland or Disney World and donate them to Make-A-Wish Foundation. Now, I say that, only one promoter ever called me and said, "Do you really mean this?" So, it just tells me how many don't read these things.
They don't pay attention.
So what was the craziest thing that you can think of?
I don't know that anybody had anything outrageous.
What was out of the norm for you think? I had artists that would say, it has to be this certain type of a limousine and it has to be this color. And yours, really, seriously? Yeah.
Well, black sedans and SUVs can be a common request. I'm trying to think if there's anything crazy or wild or outrageous that was on a rider. I don't remember anything specific like that except for quantities. Sometimes there's just crazy quantity of stuff and you're leaving at the end of the night and it's like, well, why are we asking for so much of this stuff,
120 bath towels and we used 10 of them.
Yeah, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it'll be avocados and guacamole, or what are we doing? And a knife and all these different organic things. When I was with Cassadee Pope for a long time, and she did request that we, especially in the summertime, the outdoor festivals, if somebody would bring a puppy, just somebody would bring a puppy.
Really?
Yeah. She just wanted some puppy love.
Okay.
Yeah.
That one is definitely that one's definitely off the wall.
Yeah, so we would, I'd call ahead, make sure that somebody was going to have a puppy. Bring their puppy to the show.
Just for her to play with.
Just for her to play around with backstage, stuff like that.
Wow. Okay. You found something I've never seen in a writer before.
Yeah.
When you go out with an act, typically, how far out in front of a date do you get where you start communicating with the buyers?
It varies. It varies on getting the information. I was explaining to somebody the other day, the booking agent, the management and booking agent book the date, and then they turn it over to us to make it happen. As soon as I can get the information, I'll start making calls. Coming out of the pandemic, when we're finally solidly booking dates and thinking that they were going to stick because they were moved so many times.
Right.
I was calling in January for dates that were in June and July.
When you get that far out in front, is there going to be a certain amount of lapse of memory at some point when you're 6-7 months out ahead of the game? Not necessarily on your end, but the buyer going, oh, really? You needed that?
Yeah. Well, and a lot of times it is to figure out, to make sure we, on our end, understand what all they're doing and what the venue's about and what the event's about, especially those big outdoor events. And there's several other acts involved. Trying to make sure that our needs, our writer is going to be able to be met. You know, the
in addition to everybody else's.
Yeah. And so it is. It's on me to make sure I have those notes so that when we get there, I got to go back and look. I don't remember what we talked about. But it's also so I can say, no, we talked about this. We talked
on
about
this date.
Yeah. And sometimes it helps, and sometimes it just doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You know, you would be surprised at how many times you've been guaranteed this, that, and the other, and you get there, and it's.
Well, part of that is the buyers, and this isn't beat up on the buyers but a lot of times they're trying to figure out ways to cut costs and expenses, especially if the show doesn't sell like they wanted it to, or you know their production costs in other areas are really a lot higher than they had originally anticipated.
Yeah.
It's a very tough business that we're in.
It is, especially now, and everybody's trying to make up for lost time. And it's an expensive venture no matter what, and the promoter is the biggest gambler in the whole thing. Yeah. Because everybody's going to get paid, except for them, depending on how well the show did. And so there are always going to be the question from the promoter, some sort of way. Do you really need this? Do you really need that? Because they'd rather just have, you're talking about limos or cars or whatever. We've got a runner. It's got a van. We've got a SUV, we've got a kid with a car, Sorry, I'm not sending Natalie over in a, in a
Nissan Altima that's 12 years old and it's got.
Yeah, exactly. He's got all his laundry in the back and all, it's not going to work.
We laugh about that, but that's happened.
Oh, it happens. It happens all the time. They'll
more
pull
often
up.
than not.
Yeah. And they also, sadly, will sometimes like, well, what are we going to do now? It's too late now.
Yeah.
So advancing and calling ahead. Even the day get into town the day before, I often try to go to the venue, try to go see everybody. The thing about what we do, our jobs as opposed to the musicians, is that we have to interact with these people all the time, whereas a band guy can go from the bus to the stage and go back to the bus or whatever he wants to. But we have to interact with these people all the time. We have to engage them. We're asking for stuff all day long.
And you have to play nice to a certain extent because you want them there at the end of the night when it's time to load out.
Right. And you have to know where you can have that give and take, because they're going to be asking you, do we really need this? Do we really need that? And there's things that we do really need that are expensive, and I understand that. So I'll tell you what, we can do with a few less, whatever, Fiji water. Okay, we'll do the Dasani if that's all you got. We'll do that.
Yeah.
But I got to have this. I got to have the car. I got to have the whatever. It's about expenses for sure.
I remember we had one artist that we were producing a show for a client, and they insisted on a current year Cadillac Escalade SUV for the artist.
Yeah.
I said, okay, we can do that. We actually have a relationship with the Cadillac dealer. We'll get a loaner from them. We'll make it happen.
Yeah.
And we said, okay, here's the Cadillac Escalade. Where does the artist want to go? Well, the artist wants to go from the bus to the stage door. It's 50 feet. Yeah, no, we don't care. That's the sole purpose of the Cadillac Escalade. And I just went, I cannot believe this. But you do have kind of that nitwittery, if that's a word, about it in this. I don't know how you get around that sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, there's certain things that you have to know what your artist really wants and what their bottom line is on a lot of those things, whether it's hospitality or the car or the hotel, all those sort of things. Some of our artists have a rider for the hotel. That has nothing to do with the venue.
Really?
Yeah. Several pages long. Yeah.
For the criteria for the hotel.
Criteria for the hotel for their room, that sort of thing, especially when they're carrying families.
Yeah.
So.
Never would have thought of that.
Yeah. It's just details. It's keeping up with stuff and making sure it happens, And the thing about it is the buyer, the promoter, they're pretty much aware of this when they take on, when they hire the act. Before they hire their act, they want to see the rider. They want to see what they're dealing with.
Right.
And so they're aware of it going into it. So, but they also have their tactics and say, well, I know what I can get away with.
Yeah.
that sort of thing.
Pushing the envelope.
Yeah. So our jobs from our end, and you know this, is, I always tell management or whoever, it's like, when she comes down those stairs, if she's not smiling, we're all going to hear about it, or we're not, that's my goal, is to make sure that happens,
Yeah.
And sometimes the dollars and cents doesn't matter.
Right.
And whoever's the boss is the boss. So.
In the studio with us here in Nashville, Tennessee, sitting across the podcast table is Don Muzquiz.
Hi, everyone. This is Carl Conkham, Managing Director of Warner Music Thailand, and you're listening to The Business Side of Music.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Whether you consider yourself a musician or not, music is all around us, and it affects our everyday lives, whether it's background music influencing our shopping habits in a store, organ music adding the vibe to a baseball game, or a playlist convincing us to keep going on that last mile of a run. I'm Mindy Peterson, host of the podcast Enhanced Life with Music, where we take a holistic look at music's benefits through the lens of science and medicine, entertainment, and business. You can find me and Enhance Life with Music at mpetersonmusic.com/podcast or wherever you get your audio.
When you have a Korg synth at your fingertips, the possibilities are endless. Be it digital, analog modeling, altered FM, wave sequencing, or the multi-engine synth, Korg gives you easy access to a variety of features to help you get the perfect sounds quickly. Whether you're a professional musician or just starting out, Korg truly has a synthesizer to help you express yourself. Visit Korg.com or your favorite Korg dealer to get your hands on one of their products to create new music always. Korg, the official sponsor of the business side of music.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Back in the studio here in Nashville, Tennessee, Don Muzquiz is sitting across the podcast table. In your venture down this road of being a road manager, tour manager, and production manager, and they're all very unique job roles that we do. The road manager obviously is for the band, the tour managers for the tour, and the production managers to handle the production aspect of things. And sometimes those intertwine. You kind of all become all in one. Were there some people that influenced you or helped? I'll ask an artist who comes on the show, who did you listen to as a kid? What were your musical influences? This is a little different. Was there somebody that you looked at or some people that really maybe helped you get where you're at?
There's a lot. Our business is built on a lot of networking. I don't love the word networking, but it's sort of a necessary evil, and it just sort of evolves. We get very little of our work from resumes. We get our work from word of mouth and people that we worked with recommending you or not. But going back, you were talking about music and things like that. A key moment for me, and I ask this when I'm on my podcast, what were those moments that turned you on to this business or concerts or whatever it is? For me, it was Casey and the Sunshine Band. I think it was in junior high. I took a trip with my sister and my oldest brother to New York. One of the very first concerts I ever went to was at a time when we had standing room only on the floor,
right.
And I had no idea what was going to happen. And, only familiar with the music a little bit from the radio, whatever. But when the lights went down and the drummer walked up the back stairs and he had a giant Indian headdress and you could just see his silhouette getting up to there to play and the lights came on and everything, it just changed my world. And not just the music, but I was already a drummer to some extent. I had a couple of drummers in my family, but there were so many realizations then when I was going, there's like a real job you can do, like playing drums.
And it's fun.
It's fun.
Yeah.
And the production of it. The production also, I think, is something that has stayed with me. It was a total experience. And that's what a concert is, an experience. And so as I've come along here and helped design and helped work these productions, it's about building an experience for the audience. So many people along the way, especially my family. When I came to Nashville working for Suzy, two key guys were Steve Emily and Rick Fulner. Those two guys at different times tour managed Suzy Bogguss. And I got to witness that. I was just the monitor guy. I was a sound engineer. Not that it was an easy job, but I was able to observe all these other jobs. And I think that's important for anybody that's trying to get on the road. You get to observe all these other jobs. And for whatever reason, I was drawn to it. As hard as those guys worked, they were mentors for me. And it was very thankless jobs they were doing. And at all hours, you'd think that I would try to dodge that, but I was drawn to it. And those two guys really mentored me in staying organized and being a tour manager and that sort of thing. So then Rick Fulner connected me with several other people trying to get me some other jobs on the road when Suzy, all these artists come off the road at some point, whether they take breaks or whatever it is. Connected me with Annie Bloom out of New York, and she brought me in to work on a couple of different things. And then I got connected through her, I got connected to Natalie Cole. Through Natalie Cole's management, got connected with Alanis Morissette, got connected with Fantasia. There's just a lot of, connections left and right that happen once you develop relationships with somebody on the road with these different organizations, and every one of these acts, you're traveling in a small confined space together, whether it's planes or buses, and you're living together and you have these families and you build these relationships and everything. And then these tours end or you take these huge breaks and it's just like, you're just kind of yanked out of your family.
Right.
So it's a wild experience. It's not for everybody.
Plus, jumping from one act to another, the different personalities and the idiosyncrasies and the cultures.
Yeah.
And you have to, as a tour manager or as a production manager, mostly as a tour manager, you have to ramp up to speed pretty quickly.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's kind of all day long. Like I said, some of the personnel on the road don't have the same hours, but when you're in our seat, whether it's tour manager or production managing, typically we're the first ones in, last ones out.
Outside of the tour bus driver,
yeah,
you're probably the one with the least amount of sleep and most hours on the road.
Yeah. So it's a matter of, executing what you've set up before you get out there.
The pandemic, it obviously, and we've had a couple people on the show that would talk about, we were doing great. In fact, one guy was in South America. He had an act from Spain. The pandemic hit and they started shutting down borders and he had to scramble to get his artist home to Spain, and then he had to get back here to Nashville. That time of not doing anything for especially a tour manager or production manager, what do you do? How do you really start to identify yourself? Because your identity is being on the road.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, being on the road, and I think you can relate to this, again, it's not for everybody, but it gets in your blood. And to sit that long for somebody like me that comes from a family, from parents like mine, it's hard to sit still.
Yeah.
And so I think like a lot of people, after a couple of weeks, after a month, we thought, okay, we're going to go back to work. Okay, we're going to go. And then just when I really came to the realization after things had been postponed for us with Alanis, 2020 would have been a world tour for Alanis Morissette, would have been a world tour that would have been probably a good year and a half if it had gone as planned.
Right.
Things just kept moving and postponing. There came that moment for me, and I'm sure for a lot of people were just based on the information, we're not going anywhere for a long time. It just was really hard to swallow. I mean, I just remember looking out the window and thinking, did I just dream this? I'm hoping that I'm going to wake up and somebody's going to say, where are you? We're at the airport. Let's go.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. But it just wasn't happening. So I think like a lot of us, I learned a lot about myself. But I did want to get back on the road. I did want to stay busy. I went and got a dog, which I have no business with the schedule I was keeping. He's a real rescue. He's somebody that he's one that somebody found that got dumped off somewhere. And long story, when I thought that I was going to attempt to take in an animal, knowing that I wasn't traveling for a long time, I figured out what I didn't want. I hadn't had an animal in years because of my schedule. I had heard about people getting rid of their animals because they were losing their jobs, because they couldn't feed any more people, anybody else, or they were having to move where they couldn't take an animal. And so I hated hearing that. I was just sitting around too long. And so I kind of gave up on that. I kind of talked myself out of it. But I saw this ad. The lady said that she had found this dog. She couldn't keep him. She wasn't just going to let him go to anybody. And she wanted some references. And I said, well, I'm not going to worry, but I'm just going to go. Hopefully this won't work out either, because I had seen a couple animals and I talked myself out of it.
Please don't make it happen. Please don't make it happen.
Yeah, exactly right. And I thought, well, she's not going to let me leave with him anyway. But this dog, he didn't even have a name. She said she tried out several names on him to try to figure out who he was. But he had never really been an indoor animal at all. She had a Great Dane, and she had a 4-year-old child. And so she brought him in. She'd only had him for a couple of days. Barely knows how to walk on hardwood floors and that sort of thing. She brought him into the living room on the carpet floor. I'm going off into dog land here for a second. But
that's okay. That's allowed on this show.
Okay.
As you'll see on the video, Buddy's walking around our dog.
Yeah, absolutely. So he comes in, and I just wanted to see how he interacted, because I didn't want a hyper dog. I didn't want a overactive dog or a barky dog or anything like that. But I wanted to see what his mannerisms were. Well, he just wanted to belong. There was the mom and the little boy and the Great Dane, and he just was bouncing around and trying to figure out where he was supposed to be.
Yeah.
And she said, "Look, if you're not ready to take it, you can come back. You can think about it." And I said, if I leave him here, he's going to get more attached to you, and somebody else is going to take him. She had shaved him down because he had been so matted. He hadn't been taken care of. Somebody either dumped him off or he escaped somewhere. He was very worn out around his neck. He may have been chained up in somebody's backyard. I don't know. But he wasn't taken care of. His kind of ribs sticking out and all sort of things. Anyway, I got him in the car, and I'm driving home, which wasn't easy. He was not ready to, he didn't know what he was doing. He was pretty young. We think he was about 2 or 3 when I got him. I'm driving home, and I'm going, what am I doing? And so anyway, on the way home, I was thinking of names, and long story short, I named him Leon. And he's just got me through the rest of that period in a great way. Just the companionship is fantastic. It's just like nothing else for me. So you were asking, what do you do in the pandemic? That's what I did. And then, because I still just really wanted to go to work, I was trying to figure out, what do I have? We were so looking at what we didn't have, and we had, I think that's another thing that drove me at that time to put this podcast together is, I was getting a little frustrated in that we were called non-essential, and we were going to be the last ones to go back to work, and we pretty much were, and just really very little to no options in our business to go to do anything. Even the artists doing online things and streaming things, people don't realize it's like that costs them money. They don't really get to make money unless you're a huge act. They're not really making money. And
even the big acts really weren't.
Yeah, they could sell tickets to some of those online events, but then once you do 1 or 2, then what?
Yeah.
And so we were still, acts were doing that, and they were still stuck with another 6 to 8 months of not being able to do live shows. But anyhow, I was trying to figure out, what do we have? What can I do? And I, like you, have lots of people in the business, and we were all sitting around trying to figure out what to do. I also figured out all these buses were sitting around doing nothing.
Yeah.
And
literally hundreds of buses sitting around.
Hundreds of thousands were sitting around doing nothing, and those buses aren't really made for anything else. And so I started calling around, trying to figure out, I was just trying to put some ideas together. And Jeff Michael at Celebrity Coaches was willing to work with me to do this thing. Crazy idea. It's like, you want to drive around the city with your dog and do a podcast? What are you talking about? Microphones and cameras on the bus? Yeah. So, it's like everybody's doing podcasts, which I don't, to me, this is radio. This is what we knew as radio.
Right.
Podcast is a different term for all this stuff. It's talk show. It's a talk show. But I said, the people I want to bring on here are used to riding on buses. Like I said, we're putting roadies in their natural habitat, talk to them and get all these things out. Plus I'm bringing my dog. And so we're all road dogs. It's just kind of play on words. And so that's how that evolved. And so that's what I did most of my pandemic life until we went back to work. And I had to kind of sideline my podcast because I was going back to real work. My podcast wasn't making me any money. I was spending money. What I didn't know, there's so much I didn't know. I learned a lot because I was trying to figure out a new career because our careers were just on hold pretty much. But I went out and tested and figured out. Leon had never been on a bus, so I didn't know how that was going to go. We had to test cameras on moving bus. We had to test microphones and figure out how to lay this down to where it would work. I was a few testing sessions, and then when it was time to do it, I've never been, you and I both usually on the other side of the microphone, you on the other side of the camera. When it was time to do it, I was like, oh, now I got to do this. Now the camera's on. I got to really. So I've gotten through a lot of that, which I think you probably have too, is I spent a lot of time after watching myself back and listening to myself, which nobody's used to doing unless you're an artist or a celebrity or something. I spent a lot of time just going, oh my God. It was like you don't know yourself as well until you watch yourself and listen to yourself on camera. I just felt like going and apologize to everybody because I had no idea I said this or act that way or do these things. I've kind of gotten past that. There's so many moments on camera and so many things that I say and do that I just go, what am I doing? But I just pushed through it. And so I filmed all these episodes thinking that I was going to churn them out. And we were talking pandemic talk. We were talking music business, all this stuff. And I thought I was going to turn them around in a couple of weeks. I had no idea. I had no idea about video editing. I had no idea what it took. And so I piled up 20 or so interviews that I just couldn't spit out like I thought I was going to do. Right. I built this YouTube channel and stuff. And Andy Knighton was a buddy of mine that really helped me get the thing going and filmed all this stuff. And he was new to editing, but certainly knew more than I did. If we had filmed me and him trying to figure this stuff out, that would have been a series in itself. It was hilarious.
And probably a very entertaining one.
Absolutely. Very entertaining. I was trying to figure these things out. But anyway, over the course of time, I did come into some people that could help me for not, for a decent price so that I could get these things done. And I'm still releasing those videos that I filmed a couple of years ago. But the thing is to highlight these people that rarely get interviewed, like you're doing, to highlight these people that people don't know about,
And don't know really the backstory or the behind the scenes of what goes on. You see a show that's coming to town, you buy the ticket, you go to the show, you sit in the seat, and you don't realize that 12 hours leading up to that, and days and weeks of advancing before that.
Absolutely.
And then when you leave the venue, now it's all put in reverse.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of moving bodies trying to make that work.
Oh, there's a lot. And that's when in the pandemic is when I realized how general public doesn't have any clue. I had somebody ask me when I was on the road one time before the pandemic, somebody said, tell me why you get there so early. No, the show's not till 8.
Right.
It's like,
it's not plug and play.
Yeah. And then in the pandemic, a lot of these artists, big name artists, were in the news for taking the PPP government assistance, and people were getting outraged. But it's not these artists just taking this money and putting it in the bank. They're paying. They have hundreds of employees.
Right.
There's all these things that happen that go into these shows. I think a lot of general public does think that these guys show up and jump on stage and plug in a microphone and go. And it's just, and now the productions are so much bigger. And like I said, it's the experience that you're trying to deliver. And so whether it's being provided locally or they're bringing it with them, there's a lot to it. There's just a lot to it.
The Road Dog Project is still running, though? You're still doing
doing it, still releasing videos till the end of the year. I've been loosely calling these better late than never because they were filmed so long ago.
Right.
I've tried to cut out a lot of the pandemic talk, but I try to get to everybody's story. I try to get to everybody's experience and their road stories, that kind of like we're doing here, and how they got to where they are. And everybody that I've interviewed, have impactful careers. They're whether behind the scenes or they're artists or musicians. I mean, they have. Everybody's gone through their struggles to get where they are, to have a flourishing career in the business.
Yeah.
And I think that's inspiring to anybody, but especially to other people that might want to get in the business or thinking about it. Or I found that my audience, the biggest audience that I have, is people that aren't in the business, don't necessarily care to, but they're just fascinated by the things that go on behind it.
Yeah.
Just as you and I would be, beside some other industry, finding out what people do and some of these other things. It's kind of like Discovery Channel of musicians and music business.
There should be a Discovery Channel for this.
Yeah, exactly.
What's next for you?
Still working with Alanis Morissette, probably summer of next year. Supposed to be some more overseas stuff. A lot of places we didn't ever get to make up for 2020. I do some other productions during the year. I do the ACM Honors, which is at the Ryman every year. I do the Musicians Hall of Fame induction ceremonies, which is not every year, but it's every couple of years. Just did that. And the first part of my year is open right now. And
more Road Dog projects.
More Road Dog projects. And if the tough part right now for me to continue that is that now that everybody's gone back to work, it's hard to get a bus.
Right.
But I think I can make it happen and get some of those going. I got to get you on a bus. And then I'll start advancing this summer with Alanis Morissette. You know, there's a lot to do there.
Thank you so much for being on the show. This was great.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for inviting me. And like I say, we'll have to have you on sometime.
Looking forward to it.
All right.
The Business Side of Music is the creation of Tom Sabella and Tracy Snow and is produced by Bob Bender. The Business Side of Music is recorded at Music Dog Studios in Nashville, Tennessee. Production sound design by Keith Stark. Voiceover and promo by Lisa Fuson.